Nobody wants you around anyway, my sister sneered. Mom just said, maybe it's for the best. I didn't say a word, just walked out. This morning, 12 missed calls, 5 voicemails, and a message that changed everything. I, 31M, stood in my childhood living room, surrounded by people who were supposed to love me, and felt nothing but cold emptiness spreading through my chest. My sister stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, that familiar smirk plastered across her face. She'd been building up to this moment all evening, throwing small jabs disguised as jokes during what was supposed to be a family dinner. But this time, she went further than usual. She looked me dead in the eye and told me nobody wanted me around anyway, that I was dragging everyone down with my presence, that maybe I should just stop showing up to these gatherings altogether. I turned to Mom, waiting for her to say something, anything. We locked eyes for a moment, and I saw her mouth open slightly. For a second, I thought she'd defend me like mothers are supposed to do. Instead, she glanced at my sister, then back at me, and said maybe it was for the best. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, but the words hit like a sledgehammer. Maybe some distance would be good for everyone, she added. My father sat in his recliner, newspaper in hand, pretending none of this was happening. My brother-in-law looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. My sister's kids played in the corner, oblivious. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, didn't ask why or beg them to reconsider. I simply grabbed my jacket from the coat rack, walked to the door, and left. The November air hit my face as I stepped outside, but I barely felt it. I drove home in complete silence. No music, no thoughts, just the hum of the engine and the streetlights passing overhead. That was 6 days ago. I deleted the family group chat from my phone that night. Blocked my sister's number. Didn't block Mom or Dad, but I didn't reach out either. I went to work, came home, ate dinner alone, and slept fine. Better than fine, actually. I hadn't realized how much tension I'd been carrying until it was suddenly gone. My colleagues noticed I seemed lighter. My buddy asked if I'd started dating someone because I looked happier. I just shrugged and changed the subject. Then this morning happened. I woke up at 6:30 like always, made coffee, and checked my phone. 12 missed calls, 5 voicemails, dozens of texts, all from family members. My heart didn't race with worry. Instead, I felt a strange sense of detachment, like watching a movie about someone else's life. The first voicemail was from Mom, her voice shaking, asking me to call her back immediately. The second was from Dad, more direct, saying we needed to talk about something important. My sister left one too, and for the first time in years, she wasn't sneering or condescending. She sounded desperate, almost frantic, begging me to pick up. I made myself breakfast first. Scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice. I ate slowly, deliberately, while my phone buzzed continuously on the counter. Only after I finished and washed my dishes did I finally listen to the last voicemail. It was from Mom again, recorded at 2 in the morning. She was crying, words tumbling out between sobs. She said they needed me to come home right away, that something terrible had happened, and that they'd made a horrible mistake. She said my sister had been in an accident. No, wait, that wasn't it. She backtracked, confused, said it wasn't an accident, but something else, something about money, about my brother-in-law, about everything falling apart. I played it again to make sure I heard correctly. Then I checked the texts. My brother had sent a long message explaining what happened. Apparently, my brother-in-law had been arrested 3 days ago for embezzlement. He'd been stealing from his company for 2 years, nearly $500,000, funding a lifestyle they couldn't actually afford. The house they just bought, the new cars, the private school for the kids, the expensive vacations they constantly posted about on social media, all bought with stolen money. Now everything was being seized. The house, the cars, the jewelry, everything. My sister and her kids had nowhere to go. My brother-in-law was looking at serious prison time. My parents had offered to let them move back home. But here's where it got interesting. Mom and Dad couldn't afford it. Turns out they'd been financially struggling for the past year. Dad's business had taken a hit, and they'd been burning through savings. They'd already downsized their own lifestyle considerably, something they'd hidden from everyone. Taking in my sister, her 2 kids, and covering all their expenses would break them completely. So they needed me. Specifically, they needed my money. I'd done well for myself. Started my own consulting firm 5 years ago, worked 80-hour weeks, built something solid. I lived modestly, saved aggressively, invested smartly. I had the means to help. They knew it. My sister knew it. That's what this was really about. I sat on my couch, phone in hand, reading through message after message. My sister sent one saying she was sorry for everything she'd said, that she'd been jealous of my success, that she'd been taking out her own insecurities on me for years. She said her kids needed stability, needed family, needed me. Mom sent another text saying I was their only hope, that family helps family no matter what, that she knew I had a good heart and would do the right thing. Dad's message was shorter, more businesslike, outlining exactly how much money they needed monthly to keep everyone afloat. He included a budget breakdown. He'd done the math carefully. I had to give him that. My brother, who'd remained neutral through most of our family dynamics, sent a message saying he understood if I was angry, but asking me to consider helping just for the kids' sake. They were innocent in all this. I made another cup of coffee and thought about everything. About every family dinner where my sister had mocked my career choice, calling consulting a fancy word for being unemployed. About how Mom always took her side in any disagreement because my sister was more sensitive, needed more support. About how Dad always prioritized my sister's family in conversations, asking about my life as an afterthought. About how I'd been the one to show up when they needed someone to help Dad recover from surgery 2 years ago, taking time off work, sleeping on their couch for 3 weeks, while my sister claimed she was too busy. I thought about last week, standing in that living room, hearing those words. Nobody wants you around anyway. Maybe it's for the best. I finished my coffee and finally responded to the group text they'd created. I told them I appreciated them reaching out and was sorry to hear about the difficult situation they were facing. I said I hoped they found a solution that worked for everyone. I mentioned that I'd been doing some thinking since last week and had decided their initial assessment was correct. Some distance really was for the best. I wished them all well and said I needed to focus on my own life now. Then I muted the conversation. The phone exploded with incoming calls immediately. I declined each one, then sent a follow-up message saying I wasn't available to talk and needed space. I asked them to respect that boundary. My sister called from a different number. I didn't recognize it at first and picked up by accident. She was hysterical, screaming about how I was abandoning family, how I was punishing her kids for her mistakes, how I was being selfish and cruel. I listened for a moment, then calmly told her I was simply taking her advice from last week. She'd said nobody wanted me around, and I was making that easier for everyone by staying away. I hung up before she could respond. Mom called next. This time I answered, curious what she'd say. She started with apologies, saying she'd been wrong, that she hadn't meant what she said, that she'd been stressed and not thinking clearly. She said a mother's job was to protect all her children, and she'd failed me. She was crying again, but something about it felt performative, rehearsed. I asked her a simple question. I asked if my sister hadn't been in trouble, if everything was still fine in their lives. Would she be calling to apologize right now? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. She tried to recover, saying of course she would have, that she'd been feeling guilty all week. But the hesitation had been too long, too obvious. I told her I accepted her apology, but that my decision stood. I said I hoped they figured things out, and ended the call. Dad tried a different approach. He sent a text acknowledging that they'd treated me poorly, but saying that holding grudges wasn't productive. He said family meant forgiving and moving forward, that everyone makes mistakes, and that this was an opportunity for all of us to grow closer by working through difficulties together. I almost laughed. The irony of him lecturing me about family values while admitting they treated me poorly in the same breath was remarkable. I didn't respond to that one. My brother called that evening. His approach was more measured, less desperate. He said he understood I was hurt and had every right to be angry. He said he wasn't asking me to forget what happened, just to consider that my niece and nephew were going to suffer through no fault of their own. He reminded me of how I'd always been good with them, how they asked about me, how they'd miss having their uncle around. That one stung a bit. I did care about those kids, but I also knew what would happen if I gave in now. I'd become the family ATM, expected to fund my sister's life indefinitely while she rebuilt. Every time I set a boundary, someone would mention the kids. Every time I said no to something, I'd be the bad guy. The resentment would grow, and eventually, we'd end up right back where we started, except I'd be poorer and more bitter. I told my brother I appreciated his call, but that my decision was final. I said he was welcome to help them himself if he felt so strongly about it. He admitted he was already stretched thin with his own family's needs and couldn't contribute much financially. So I asked him why it was okay for me to sacrifice my financial security, but not okay for him to do the same. He didn't have a good answer for that. The messages continued for 3 days. Desperate, angry, pleading, manipulative. Some tried guilt, others tried logic. A few even tried threats about cutting me off completely, which was almost funny considering they'd essentially already done that. My sister sent a message saying her kids were crying, asking where I was, not understanding why uncle suddenly didn't want to see them anymore. She said I was traumatizing children with my selfishness. I replied once more, telling her that she'd created this situation, not me, and that using her kids as emotional weapons wasn't going to work. I said she should be honest with them about why their lives were changing instead of making me the villain. That night, Mom sent a long email. It was calmer than her previous attempts, more thought out. She wrote about family legacy, about how her own parents had always supported each other, about how she'd imagined all her children staying close forever. She acknowledged specific times she'd favored my sister, admitted she'd been wrong, and promised things would be different if I just gave them another chance. I read it twice. Parts of it seemed genuine. But then she ended it with another request for money, laid out over several paragraphs, explaining exactly what they needed and when. That's when I knew for certain. This wasn't about reconciliation. This wasn't about family healing. This was about solving a financial crisis, and I was the solution they'd identified. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks now since everything exploded, and somehow the situation has gotten even messier. I maintained my silence for the most part, only responding to work emails and messages from friends. My phone still buzzed periodically with family attempts to reach me, but less frequently. They were either giving up or regrouping for another strategy. Last Tuesday, something unexpected happened. My aunt, Mom's sister, called me. We'd always had a decent relationship, though we only saw each other at major holidays. She lived about 3 hours away and had stayed out of family drama generally. She told me she'd heard what happened, both the dinner incident and the current crisis. Then she told me something I didn't know. Apparently, my parents had already asked her for money first, before reaching out to me. She'd declined because her husband was dealing with his own medical issues and they couldn't take on additional financial burdens. But here's the interesting part. She told me that at the last family gathering I hadn't attended, about 8 months ago, my sister had spent the entire afternoon complaining about me, going on about how I thought I was better than everyone else, how I was too focused on money, how I probably looked down on her for being a stay-at-home mom. My mother had agreed with some of it, saying I'd become distant and difficult to talk to. My aunt had defended me, apparently, mentioning how I'd helped Dad during his recovery and always showed up when actually needed. She said Mom had dismissed that, saying I only did those things to feel superior. I thanked my aunt for telling me. She said she thought I deserved to know the truth about how I was discussed in my absence. She also said she supported my decision completely and didn't blame me one bit for walking away. That conversation crystallized something for me. This wasn't a recent development. The disrespect, the dismissiveness, the casual cruelty, it had been building for years, happening behind my back at every gathering I missed. That dinner 2 weeks ago wasn't an anomaly. It was just the first time they'd said it directly to my face. Thursday brought another development. My brother-in-law's parents apparently offered to help my sister. They were taking in the kids temporarily while my sister figured out housing. My parents were relieved, and I heard through my brother that the immediate crisis was somewhat resolved. I felt nothing about this news. No relief, no disappointment, nothing. That's when I realized how completely I detached from them emotionally. Friday evening, my sister showed up at my apartment. I have no idea how she got past building security, but there she was, knocking on my door at 7 p.m. I looked through the peephole, saw her, and almost didn't open it. But I was curious what she'd try in person. She looked terrible. Hair unwashed, clothes wrinkled, eyes red and swollen. She asked if she could come in. I stepped outside instead, closing the door behind me, keeping the conversation in the hallway. She tried a different tactic this time. No yelling, no accusations. Instead, she told me she'd been in therapy, that her therapist had helped her understand she'd been projecting her own failures onto me for years. She said she'd been jealous of my independence, my success, my freedom from the complications she'd chosen. She said her marriage had been falling apart for a while, that she'd known something was wrong but had buried her head in the sand. She said she understood if I never wanted to speak to her again, but she needed me to know she was sorry. Genuinely, deeply sorry. Not because she needed money, but because she'd been a terrible sister. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I asked her one question. I asked if she remembered my 30th birthday party last year. She looked confused, said of course she remembered. I reminded her that she'd canceled the day before, claiming one of the kids was sick. Then I asked if she remembered what I'd found out later, that she'd actually gone to a spa day with her friends that same day, posting about it on social media. Her face went pale. I told her that was when I'd started pulling away, when I'd realized I was never going to be a priority for her unless she needed something from me. I said the dinner 2 weeks ago had just confirmed what I already knew. She started crying, saying she didn't remember that she'd made so many mistakes, that she wanted to make it right. I told her I believed she was sorry, but that sorry wasn't enough. I said some things, once broken, can't be fixed, and our relationship was one of them. I wished her luck with everything and went back inside my apartment. She stood in the hallway for a while. I could hear her crying through the door. Eventually, she left. Update 2. A month has passed since I walked out of that dinner, and my life has changed in ways I didn't expect. The family messages have mostly stopped. I get the occasional text from Mom, usually something brief and superficial, asking how I'm doing. I respond politely, but don't engage beyond pleasantries. Dad hasn't reached out at all. My sister tried twice more, but I didn't respond. My brother and I met for coffee 2 weeks ago. It was civil, almost friendly. He said he understood my position better now, that watching everything unfold had opened his eyes to some family dynamics he'd been ignoring. He admitted he'd always taken the path of least resistance, staying neutral to avoid conflict, and he could see how that had made things worse for me. He told me my sister and her kids were living with her in-laws temporarily. My brother-in-law had taken a plea deal and would serve 18 months. My parents had taken a second mortgage on their house to help cover some of my sister's legal fees and immediate expenses. He said they were managing, but things were tight. I didn't ask for more details. It wasn't my problem to solve, and I'd made peace with that. The unexpected part came from work. Without the constant emotional drain of family obligations and drama, I'd thrown myself even deeper into my business. I landed 2 major contracts in the past month, my biggest clients yet. I'd also started mentoring younger consultants, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the energy for. I'd started dating someone I met through a professional networking event. We'd gone out 3 times, and she was refreshingly drama-free. When I told her a condensed version of my family situation, she didn't try to convince me to reconcile or tell me that family was everything. She just said it sounded like I'd made a healthy choice for myself and changed the subject. Last week, something happened that felt like closure, though I didn't know I needed it. I ran into an old family friend at a restaurant, someone who'd known us all since I was a kid. He asked if I'd be at the upcoming family event my parents were planning. I told him probably not, that I'd been taking some space from family gatherings. He nodded slowly, then said something that surprised me. He told me he'd always thought I was the most level-headed of the siblings, that he'd noticed over the years how differently I was treated compared to my sister, and that he didn't blame me for stepping back. He said watching me always accommodate everyone else's needs while getting nothing in return had been difficult to witness. He said he'd almost mentioned it to my parents several times, but figured it wasn't his place. I thanked him for saying that. It meant more than he probably knew, having someone from the outside validate what I'd experienced. This morning, I received an email from Mom. It was different from her usual short texts. She wrote that she'd been doing a lot of thinking and had come to understand that she'd failed me as a mother in crucial ways. She said she'd been so focused on my sister's neediness that she'd neglected my needs, assuming I was fine because I never complained. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, but she wanted me to know she saw her mistakes clearly now. She said watching me completely detached from the family had been devastating, but that she understood it was a consequence of her own actions. She ended by saying I didn't need to respond, that she just wanted me to know she loved me and was proud of who I'd become, despite her failures. I read it several times. Part of me wanted to believe it was genuine. Part of me wondered if it was another manipulation attempt. Mostly, though, I felt sad. Sad for what could have been, for the family we might have been if things had been different. I haven't responded yet. I'm not sure I will. The truth is, I'm genuinely happy now. My life is peaceful, productive, and filled with people who actually value me. I don't miss the constant stress of family obligations, don't miss walking on eggshells around my sister, don't miss feeling like an afterthought. Maybe that makes me cold. Maybe I should be more forgiving, more willing to give second chances. But I've learned that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is protect your own peace, even if other people don't understand it. Nobody wants you around anyway, my sister had said. Turns out, she was right about one thing. They didn't want me around. They wanted my wallet around. Now that I'm gone, they're figuring out how to manage without either. And I'm finally figuring out who I am without them.